Happy Sunday. Welcome to The Science Behind with Harper Crevitz. This episode is the science behind FOMO. I'm working on various series under marine biology, environmental science, and brain science and psychology, which is our current series. There's only 2 episodes left in this series, so stay tuned. In this episode, I'm going to cover the psychology behind why people feel FOMO, including brain regions and FOMO's impact. Let's get into it. If FOMO is a completely new word for you, it stands for fear of missing out. People say they have FOMO when they have to abandon a birthday party at the last second, or they see other people enjoying events that they're not a part of. So, like anything we talk about here on The Science Behind, FOMO is deeply rooted in psychology systems that are responsible for our emotions and our response. So FOMO is primarily rooted in the desire for inclusion and connection, which makes sense because you're watching somebody else receive an opportunity. It also brings up feelings of anxiety and comparison, which we're going to talk about a lot in this episode, when you're comparing your life to somebody else's, and that often makes you feel behind in life. So let's get into the psych. Because a major driver of FOMO is social comparison, we're going to quickly go over the social comparison theory. It's pretty straightforward. The theory states people have a natural tendency to evaluate themselves by comparing their lives to others. For example, if you see all your friends get invited to a party, you gain a sense of inadequacy that your life is less fulfilling simply because you didn't get invited. Humans are very social things. We talk and collaborate in almost everything we do for belonging and inclusion. So when that's reversed and a person is excluded, it feels very unnatural, and that taps into your fear response, which makes it hard not to think people are constantly experiencing something without you. This is the need for social connections, which humans inherently have. So if you have FOMO, you're not alone. Almost everybody does. Our next idea is called loss aversion, which basically talks about how people fear losing opportunities more than they value gaining something new. Missing an experience triggers loss aversion and makes missing out feel significant and a much bigger deal than it really is. Finally, let's talk about perceived scarcity, which is exactly what it sounds like. It increases FOMO. Exclusive events that are labeled once-in-a-lifetime opportunities create an illusion that the experience is rare and pressures participation as well as regret when you cannot go. Alright, well, I can't just leave you with psychology. We need some brain science. And this episode has no shortage, so pay attention. Let's talk about what systems and regions are responsible for feeling those emotions of comparison, anxiety, and fear. First, let's introduce the amygdala. If you've listened to the first episode, The Science Behind Reading, you know the amygdala is part of the limbic system in the brain and controls your stress and threat detection. Here we're going to introduce another part of the limbic system, which is the hypothalamus, and it works with the amygdala. The hypothalamus and amygdala paired together are triggered by the distress of missing out on a social experience, and that makes you feel that fear and anxiety associated with FOMO. Next, we have the precuneus, which is part of the DMN or default mode network from our last episode, The Science Behind Generational Clash, so things are coming back and connecting. The precuneus handles self-referential thoughts and social cognition, which is that part of FOMO where you compare your life to others. FOMO is also linked to the reward system, so welcome our friend dopamine, which is a neurotransmitter or messenger in the brain, controlling motivation, pleasure, and regulation. Finally, we have the frontal lobe and the temporal gyrus. There's increased activity in these areas when individuals experience that social exclusion from FOMO, and is also present when monitoring social media, so we're going to see a lot of overlap. All of these brain regions work together to feel social comparison and anxiety, often driving that addictive checking of social media. This brings us to our third segment, which is how FOMO is impacted by social media. So like I said earlier, FOMO uses the DMN, where social media pushes self-comparison to unrealistic standards. Social media introduces a feature called highlight reels, which is where people can post their most exciting memories of their lives, and it gives people an unrealistic perception of reality, and makes it seem like your life is gloomy and boring compared to others. This creates a pattern seen in teenagers today, which is a sort of vicious cycle of compulsively checking social media, and that's all compelled by anxiety associated with FOMO. But what does social media do to your brain in relation to FOMO? Our friend dopamine is back. Platforms like Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat send rewards, for example, likes, notifications, or comments, which trigger dopamine releases and encourage checking social media, feeding into the vicious cycle. Fun fact, social pain actually overlaps with physical pain. Here come some big words. Social exclusion activates the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula. The anterior cingulate cortex is a frontal brain region and is actually a part of the limbic system. The science behind the limbic system is our best friend. This area, known as the ACC, integrates cognitive, emotional, and autonomic functions, similar to other parts of the limbic system. But more specifically, it's an area for error detection, as well as conflict monitoring and pain processing. All of those functions are used when you're scrolling on social media or feel FOMO, which is again an overlap. Next to the insula is a super deep brain region that is underneath the lateral sulcus, which is just a big groove on the surface of the brain, separating the frontal lobe and the temporal parietal lobes, which are just behind it. Draw a line on the top of your head from the back of both ears. The very top is the lateral sulcus. Okay, enough brain geography because it gets confusing. The insula is right under that and controls a lot of the same things like pain, emotion, and decision making, as well as self-awareness, which connects to that sense of self-comparison that comes within FOMO. These fancy schmancy brain words are knit into a big quilt that says brain plus social media equals lots of FOMO. So we've talked about what FOMO is and how social media amplifies it, but what are the effects? FOMO changes your mental health quite a bit, and more for the worse than for the better. As you can imagine, constant comparison is not healthy. It leads to things like chronic anxiety, low self-esteem, and in extreme scenarios, depression. The need to stay updated and connected causes a lot of worry, which leads to that anxiety, stress, and depressive symptoms. Comparing your own life to curated highlight reels, which we talked about earlier, give you feelings of inadequacy and overall a very negative self-image. FOMO also keeps individuals less present and reduces the enjoyment of current moments, often deriving a lot of those depressive symptoms and losing interest or joy in activities that used to seem fun and exciting, simply because they don't compare to other people's perfect and pretty lives, which are all at face value. There can also be physical effects like sleep disruption and fatigue. I know when I'm online a lot, I definitely lose sleep because of all that blue light. Notifications also cause that lack of sleep. More disconnectedly, obsessive checking from FOMO leads to stomach tension, nausea, headaches, and higher heart rate. Most commonly, all of those are from the anxiety and stress that come with FOMO and checking social media all the time. Now, by no means does this mean stay off social media, but changing the way you compare yourself to others is a big part of having a healthy relationship with it. And that comes with not believing everything you see online or treating it as the only part of people's lives. Social media is still a great way to connect with people, learn, and explore, as well as being more creative. It's how I promote this very podcast you're listening to. With that, that's the end of this week's episode. Thanks for listening to The Science Behind with me, Harper Krefitz. Please reach out to thesciencebehind.media@gmail.com or comment on any published episodes with suggestions for future episodes or questions you may have. See you next Sunday where we make science make sense.